Yeah, that's the car that like it shows up at Volkswagen's front door, and every day they go out to like take the dog out, it punches them in the mouth. Hello and welcome back to the Plugged In Podcast, a weekly news show all about the future of transportation. I'm Patrick George, editor-in-chief of InsideEVs.
And I'm Tim Levin, senior reporter at InsideEVs. Today we've got even more for you from our team's recent trip to China. And we'll even be joined by InsideEVs' original China expert, Kevin Williams.
Yeah, everyone loved me screaming so much last week about how far ahead China's EV sector is that they brought me back to do even more yelling and screaming this week. Are you so excited for that, Tim?
Yeah, super. People who only listen to the audio version of this show may not realize that all this gray hair Patrick has, that is just in the last week. That's just from China. He didn't have any of that beforehand.
Yes, driving those cars and then coming home to our auto industry aged me 25 years physically. So that's really cool and great.
Yeah, we've got a lot to discuss about how far ahead China's automakers are, including what Patrick and Kevin got to drive while they were there. And we'll answer the important question of, can our automakers catch up?
I sure as hell don't feel great about that, but on the plus side, my China jet lag is mostly gone, and I'm back to waking up at 5 a.m. and going to bed at 10 p.m. every day like a farmer. It's not for everyone.
Yeah. Before we get into China stuff, we've got some less than optimal news about the EV race in the U.S.
Yeah, it's not good, Tim. It's not good.
Yeah, U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson told Bloomberg on Tuesday that more likely than not, America's tax credit for electric cars will die soon. Eliminating the popular tax credit of as much as $7,500 for people who buy an EV has been a prime target for some politicians looking for ways to help pay for President Trump's massive tax cut package and also cut quote-unquote woke policies. On Tuesday, Johnson said, "I think there's a better chance we kill it than save it, but we'll see how it comes out."
Yeah, it's quite frustrating to come home from China where the car market is so advanced because of their national industrial policy getting behind it. And then I see this here in America, and it's disappointing, and we'll tell you why. So, like, I'll go to this and just say that, like, I get both sides of this argument for sure. Like, a lot of people have scoffed at the EV tax credit. They don't want their tax dollars paying for what they call rich people toys. Especially if they're not interested in buying an electric car themselves, and especially under the auspices of fighting climate change, which many people don't believe in anyway. But that kind of ignores often like the fact that how much we've subsidized gas cars in this country. Like really, yes, really. Yeah. From building highways back in the 1950s to keeping the gas tax unchanged since Bill Clinton's first term, bailing out the auto industry in the aughts. I mean, basically, your auto industry is so important to any country's GDP and jobs and technological competitiveness that, generally nations will do whatever it takes to help them stay ahead. And Germany does this, certainly the Japanese do this, the Koreans do it, China's done the hell out of it. And we're kind of leaving this up to like the quote unquote free market, like this magical force that, hasn't really helped the auto industry like stay competitive in the past. But it may be the reason that it loses now.
Yeah. And there are actually a few different tax credits. We don't know if Johnson's talking about cutting one of them or all of them, but I thought it'd be worth just going through quickly, like what is possibly on the chopping block here. There's kind of the main one for EV purchases, which gives you $7,500. There is the $4,000 credit for used EVs, and then there's a separate one that subsidizes leased EVs. Yeah, all of these were either created or substantially kind of revised through the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. But the thing that most people don't realize about the EV tax credit is that it's pretty limited. It really is focused on boosting North American EV and battery production. It's not like any old EV can qualify for it. These cars need to be made in North America. they can't have any Chinese battery components or critical minerals. And also an escalating portion of their batteries have to be made either in the US or by US allies over time. There's also income caps and price caps. So this really is not just a handout to like rich people, right? And then just the last thing I'd note is like, I do bet that they are looking especially closely at that leasing credit. This is technically a credit for commercial EVs that, through kind of a loophole, allows any EV leases to qualify for that $7,500 off, even if they don't meet all those strict criteria that I was just talking about. And so that's why you see all these crazy sweet lease deals, and also why there are a ton of EV leases happening right now.
Yeah, everybody did this. Like everybody did this, and it was. We all kind of thought, we kind of knew it would not be sustainable forever, that you would not just be getting like dirt cheap electric vehicles for, I don't know, like Mac Hogan leases his Blazer EV for $200 a month. And like, that's like felony theft, honestly. Like we all knew this party would come to an end at some point. But as you said, like the goal, get cleaner cars on the road. And I think perhaps most importantly was like, build up the battery supply chain in America, like the supply chain to make batteries and battery components, which we do not have. The Chinese have a lock on that. They spent 20 years doing it, and we are scrambling to catch up. And it's like, that's a supply and demand thing, right? If you create demand for EVs, then you create supply for batteries, which we will need to stay competitive in the future. And I mean, the fear is that obviously, like, losing the tax credits will stifle EV sales, and that will also mean that these car companies will be less incentivized to invest in next generation technologies, which will help them compete with some of the car companies we're about to talk about here. And then you add in like the hit from the tariffs, which General Motors said this week, they're projecting $4 to $5 billion in losses from tariffs alone. Car companies are not going to be spending big on R&D soon. Like they're just not. Like they don't have the cash for it. It's save your money mode, like probably like a lot of households are doing in America right now. So I think this puts China ahead of us. It just does. And like after this, you know, if all the stuff we're doing with tariffs, and if we lose the tax credit too, it's like, don't come crying to me someday when like Ford only makes gas pickup trucks for industrial customers and every other car you buy is made by Huawei. Like if that ever happens, like it started here and now in 2025.
Right. And when you look at the idea that the EV tax credits could go away, plus the Trump administration taking away or loosening all these other climate regulations, like we may not be left with a lot that's actually pushing automakers in the US to move quickly toward EVs, which is something that they need to do to compete with China. And you mentioned that this is definitely going to stifle EV sales. We have some estimates on that from, this is from Princeton professor Jesse Jenkins, who runs the Repeat Project, also co-host of the Shift Key podcast from Heat Map, which everybody should go listen to. So by his analysis, this is if EPA tailpipe emissions regulations and the clean vehicle tax credits are repealed, sales of battery electric vehicles could drop about 40% in 2030 relative to a scenario where current policies are continued. Cumulatively, by 2030, there could be 8.3 million fewer EVs and plug-in hybrids on U.S. roads. So this is going to have a really severe impact. If because of the emissions regulations, car companies aren't trying to push EVs, and also if people aren't incentivized to buy them, it would also be really bad for manufacturing, right? As you said, these kinds of policies create demand for, U.S. batteries and U.S. EVs. And we know that post-IRA, companies have announced around $100 billion in investments in EV and battery factories in the U.S., which promise to create well over 100,000 jobs. Like this is serious. This is like serious amounts of U.S. manufacturing, serious amounts of U.S. jobs that are at stake if these EV supporting policies go away.
Yeah, and that's why it's worth noting there's actually a bunch of Republicans in Congress that want to keep it or want to keep a version of it because that's jobs in their districts. I was at the Hyundai Meta plant in Georgia last month, talking to Representative Buddy Carter, who is a Republican congressman. And he's like, look, like, let's take a scalpel to the IRA and not a sledgehammer to it, because a lot is riding on this. And like, maybe not all of those folks like love EVs or believe in the reality of climate change or whatever, but like they are like clear-eyed about the economic side of this, and also like not getting smoked by China on this stuff. So, you know, when we had Mike Murphy on from the EV Politics Project earlier this year, you know, he talked about how, you know, the cut to the EV tax credit is part of the massive tax cut and spending cut bill that President Trump is proposing, like you mentioned at the outset. And, you know, if you're a lawmaker and you're given the choice between like giant cuts to Medicaid and like cutting like the tax credit so rich people can buy fancy electric cars, like it's a no-brainer which one you're gonna swing the axe on, right? I mean, even given the choice, I would certainly agree with that. But it's when you think about the jobs that are at stake here and the technological competitiveness that's at stake here, I think it might have more of a fight on its hands than we think. So we'll see what happens. But it would be a real shame to see this much progress go away. When we saw record EV sales last year and more people getting into this stuff, and we're trying to build out a charging network and just kind of like get competitive with the rest of the world. And instead of that, we're turning inward. So, yeah, we'll see, man, you know?
All right, now we're going to turn our attention to the rest of our coverage from the Shanghai Auto Show. Last week you heard from Patrick, who did his first trip to China for the show. Now you're going to hear from a China veteran, a writer who has visited the country 3 times and has probably driven more Chinese EVs than any other Western journalist.
Please welcome Kevin Williams, folks.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good, man. How's your Chinese jet lag? Are you mostly recovered, or is that gonna take a little longer?
I mean it is what it is. I mean I've always been a night owl, so we're just kind of rolling through it, right?
I feel you. So I want to start this segment off with an anecdote, which is that like I said on last week, I'm not used to like going to an auto show and being out of my depth, but like China's market is so different that it's easy to get lost. And like I don't know what all those brands are. And I certainly know the ones we cover and the stuff I read about, but it's like there was so much more to that market and its history and its landscape than I knew about. But Kevin, you do everything. Like I was walking around and I was just like, you were pointing out this is this brand, this is that company. They work with General Motors, and just like you're a walking encyclopedia of Chinese car industry fact. I was blown away by it. Like, how did you get so into this stuff?
You know, that's a good ass question. I feel like, you know, I grew up kind of on internet message boards, and just kind of by osmosis, it was only natural for me to find out about Chinese cars. You know, this would have been like, you know, the late 2000s, back when Chinese cars are still a joke.
Yeah.
But they were kind of fun to pick on, and, you know, maybe I was kind of like a kid who didn't have that many friends. So I was just kind of, you know, oh, you got to stick up for these cars. Either this industry is going to be something someday. And, you know, 13-year-old me didn't really know that. I mean, they're just kind of talking, but I was also kind of right. So yeah. It was interesting to watch them slowly go from, you know, cloned Corollas with Mitsubishi engines, or how back in the day everything was a Citroen ZX underneath with Toyota engines made off license or stolen. And then just kind of like it slowly, but also like not really all that slow, started turning into something that was really competent.
Yeah.
So, and I felt like, you know, I was watching it happen, and people were just kind of a little too quick to say that, oh, it's just kind of stupid clones. You know, they'll never have the expertise to really challenge the West. And I'm like, I don't know if we should say that. And that was in 2010. So here we are now, and I was right.
You should have bought some shares. Maybe you should have bought some shares in BYD or something.
Honestly, it's actually funny because out of all the brands, I didn't think they were going to do it. But look at me, look at them.
For the record, listener, no one's allowed to do that here.
No, we can't.
Yeah, my wife's still mad that I made her sell her Tesla shares before we got married. Of course, those aren't doing so hot these days, but for a while she was mad about it. But no, like it is interesting. Like in the last couple of years, these brands have gone from, like you said, Corolla clones to like Tesla killers. I mean, that happened for them very quickly, and it seems like all the Western automakers just totally missed it somehow, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of very quickly, but also like not that quick if you've been paying attention.
Yeah. So what did you think about this year's show versus Beijing last year? And also, two-part question. You wrote a good story for us today about how some of the brands that you saw last year like do not exist anymore. So, like, how do you compare this year's show to last year's show? And also, how has the market evolved since you've been covering it, like, as a journalist?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think this year there were definitely a lot more, Western journalists or content creators or whoever at the show, and they're kind of overwhelmed with the amount of choices and new products on there. But for people who have been there before, even though I've only been there a couple times, it definitely felt a little quieter. And I know that's really hard to believe and look at Patrick's face, right?
Yeah, that's stunning to me.
But if you really think about it, there weren't that many new car debuts. There were more concepts, even from Chinese brands. There were more, pre-production vehicles that didn't have full interiors. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it shows that maybe there's a little bit of a slowing down on China's market here. The cars that I did see, like I was at the BYD stand, and pretty much most of their models got a pretty big facelift this year. Not only did they get like the God's Eye D-Pilot autonomous driving or assisted driving equipment this year, but there were just some stuff with infotainment and interior plastics to make the cars feel a little nicer. Yeah, I think just as a whole, I think the whole Chinese market is getting a little bit more mature, but instead of like big leaps, with brand new models or a whole bunch of new tech, I think it's just more so refinement here.
Yeah, I read that it was there were over 100 car brands there, which I believe, and about 1,300 cars at the show itself. And it's like you have to imagine that is a development pace that's not sustainable for anybody. Like you can't keep that pace up forever, right? Yeah.
Right. Like I don't think it's possible for any brand, even if they are getting state money, to keep starting over anytime they screw up a car.
Yeah.
So I think on some level maybe they're kind of falling back into more traditional OEM, style of refinement and facelifts and, more slower updates. Although I guess slow in this context would definitely be a lot faster than most Western OEMs, but I don't think it's as a quantum leap as when the country opened up. I think Beijing was actually the first auto show that China had post COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So the last time you've been in the country was 2020, and they were kind of making okay stuff, and then you come to China, and oh my God, they're making all this stuff that is beating the brakes off of us. I suppose, yeah, that would definitely be a huge, jump.
Yeah, that's the thing we've covered before, right? It's like they were working just triple overtime when they were locked down and the world really couldn't see it. And then we go back in and it's like, oh, what, you didn't know? It's that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and slow for China is still way faster than most of the rest of the world can do things. That's kind of one of the big advantages that I feel like doesn't maybe get talked about enough is one of the big advantages of the Chinese automakers is they're cheap and they're, high quality and stuff. But one of the things that the rest of the world seems to not be able to contend with at all is how quickly they roll out new models, right? They're developing a model in 18 months, 24 months. This is something that takes traditional automakers 4 or 5 years to develop a new car and put it on the road.
Right.
Kevin, I was just kind of overwhelmed by everything I saw there, but what brands were you most excited to see? What impressed you the most at the show itself?
This is kind of a hard question to answer because it's a lot of this stuff I've kind of already seen before. um, I know that sounds like first world problems, right? Just kind of humble brag here.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that impressed me the most would probably be Chery. Their sub-brand iCar. The iCar V23 was a really solid offering. Chery kind of has a really bad reputation in China for being kind of like, low quality vehicles, both ICE and EV. And they were kind of the outlier this year. They had a lot of debuts of new cars, and it kind of felt like, that brand itself was playing catch up on the Chinese market. But the iCar V23, it's inspired of Beijing's military Jeep, which was kind of I guess it's a rebodied, Russian Jeep, a UAZ. But it's kind of like been done up in a way that's sort of like how we do the new Bronco or the Hummer EVs.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's such an interesting truck. I don't even like SUVs, and I like that truck. It's chic, and it's not that expensive. It's like a baby G-Wagon with like People's Liberation Party flair. It's like,
no, but this is so cool when you think about it, right? It's like we know how big the retro truck craze is in America. Like you talked about the Bronco and the Wrangler. It's like they do it, but it's like Soviet stuff and like peak China communism stuff. Because well, of course it is. That's what they had back then. Like that's just kind of funny to think about.
Yeah, like like the Wrangler and Bronco are such like pieces of Americana. Like what does that same concept look like when it's applied to China?
Same thing.
And now we have an answer. We have this thing that I think personally, I think the V23 would sell really well in any market, regardless of propulsion system, because it's just so cool looking. I think another good one will probably be Firefly. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. It kind of looked like, some people definitely do think it's a Honda E knockoff, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong. But I think in person, I think it's a little bit more than that. I had a really good conversation with the CEO of that brand, and just like how some of the branded decisions they made to create that model, and its plans for Europe and elsewhere. So
for quick context, the car he's talking about is this kind of Mini Cooper Fiat kind of deal, which we drove and we're going to talk about later, and it ruled. But it's like it's very clearly aimed at Europeans. This thing, not so much China itself, right? Yeah.
It's kind of like China's kind of like the second market for this place. But it's definitely supposed to be sort of a small premium hatchback, which believe it or not, they actually don't have that many offerings in China for that kind of vehicle. So I'm interested to see what it's going to do.
Yeah, when I was riding the Firefly with a guy from Neo, he was like, "This isn't for us." I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "Yeah, this is like Chinese people don't like this car. It's too small. It's a micro car. Like this is we're going after Fiat and Mini on their home turf with this thing."
Like we said last time, Chinese buyers are kind of more like Americans than we think, right? Big,
yeah, they do.
They like big cars and screw those little ones.
Yeah, which is so funny because like 10 years ago it wasn't like that. They really were buying smaller cars en masse, but as China's like middle class continues to grow, now they're just kind of like now a big car bust. Like if you look anywhere on the anywhere in any given Chinese city, you'll probably see some sort of Li Auto or Ado vehicle, which are not small cars. They're like mid-size crossover, full-size crossover. So think Toyota Highlander, GMC Acadia. They're not little cars, and they're everywhere in China.
One thing I want a quick segue on that I learned over there from you, it's like people kind of go up in car size depending on like their sort of like where they're at in life. And like you see versions of that in America, but it's more pronounced over there. Like Boxsters and Caymans are really popular with young people. Like if it's just you and your sweetheart, whether you're a guy or a gal, you only need a 2-seater car, and then you get the bigger one, and then it's a very like family based society. So if you're carting around mom and dad and the kids and or your in-laws, you're going to want a bigger vehicle, right? Like it kind of goes in those stages for them, right?
Yeah, that's part of the reason why everything in China has a big back seat. Because if you're carrying your in-laws, they don't care about driving dynamics. They want to know like, are we comfortable?
Yeah.
So
yeah. So we've been kind of bouncing around the market and talking about various things that you guys saw. I think we should talk about what you guys drove more specifically. And I thought it would be interesting to choose a few cars in China that really kind of symbolize this market and why it's so impressive in various ways. And I wanted to start with the BYD Seagull. This is the car that has achieved legend status around the world. This is what keeps, auto executives up at night. This is when you hear about that like $10,000 Chinese car or $10,000 BYD, people are talking about the Seagull. This is like a small hatchback that's kind of looks like a smaller Honda Fit, and you can buy it for crazy cheap, way cheaper than any car in America, right? And Kevin actually got to drive it, so I'm super curious to hear what you thought about it, and also like if there's anything I missed about the sort of basics of like what this car is. Fill us in on that too.
Yeah, it's I feel like a lot. It does. Anytime you say BYD Seagull for any sort of article, SEO goes crazy, and we just get all sorts of comments, especially old people. I want to get this for my granddaughter. It'd be great for her at college and that sort of deal, right?
Yeah.
But I understand why the Seagull is so popular in China, and I understand why automakers are so terrified of this car. So for starters, the BYD Seagull kind of isn't a lot of car. I actually had to drive or catch a train from Shanghai to Suzhou, which is a neighboring city. It's about a 20-minute ride on a high-speed train, because the Seagull is too cheap and too short to be registered in Shanghai.
Which we didn't know at the time. We found this out over instant message with some BYD people. Oops.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that Shanghai had this law, but basically they kind of like low key banned a lot of small and cheap mini cars from being registered in Shanghai. I think it's supposed to combat congestion. I don't know. I think they think that the cars are too easy and too cheap to get. But basically, BYD told us like, if you're gonna drive one, you have to go way outside of the city. Which is fine, it's whatever. So the car itself is about, I'd say tit for tat, about the same size as a Chevy Spark EV. Like almost
real
dimensionally. It's not. I mean, it's small, but it's not that small. I'd say in the United States, it'd be classified as a city car or an A segment vehicle. I have a Fiat 500, so it's about the same size, just with an extra set of doors. But I think what's really striking about the Seagull is just how well put together it is. It feels, I kind of have a mixed opinion about BYD's cars. I wasn't sure if it just seems like the people who are boosting up this brand don't necessarily have that much experience with it. And I've been kind of like indifferent, like, well, I've had a little bit of experience. I've driven an Atto 3 way back in 2021 at the Paris Auto Show, and I thought it was okay. I sat in a couple of BYDs when I was in Japan for the Honda Zero series. There was a BYD dealer across town that I took a cab to go see because I just was bored and wanted to go see. And I was like, this is all right. I mean, it's okay. I mean, I'm not quite sure why people are so scared of this brand. And then I got behind the wheel and drove it, and it's just really well done. Packaging wise, it's not a very big car, but yet then it doesn't feel cramped. Even for me, being an American, so I'm definitely taller and wider than a lot of the people in China, right? The rear seats, I mean, there's only two belts back there because it's kind of a narrow car, but there's plenty of legroom here. The interior plastics are all fit together really well. And the car's infotainment system is actually, very sophisticated for how little you pay. I mean, I think the one that BYD gave me was a top of the line, pretty much with all boxes checked. And I think it would have been about 11 grand, like 11.6.
Yeah.
Of course, there are some downsides. Like, it's only got 75 horsepower. So like after above 55 miles an hour, it really struggled. And the battery is only like 38 kilowatt hours. So it can't go all that far. But it feels like such a real car. It didn't feel like everything was like I was going to follow the car. Like, it's just like, oh, this is definitely like the bare minimum basic car that you can get in China. and this is just a stopgap until you can buy something else.
What was that really small, also ultra affordable? Was that an iCar also? The really little?
No, that was a Wuling. It was a blue.
Yes.
That was a Wuling Mini. That was a Wuling Mini Huangguang Mini EV, and that was the second generation, the one that's just been updated. And that was also like, quite a bit more refined than I thought, and that was about half the price of the BYD.
And that's the point I was going to break. It's like I was amazed at how nice their super affordable cars are. And like I know these would be more expensive if you made it in Mexico or Europe or the US, but their cheap stuff is really nice there. And a cheap car in America, if you find one anymore, like sucks.
Yeah, and I'm thinking because I think the Seagull is already making its way in Latin America. I think it's a Dolphin Mini for about double the price. Yeah, and it still feels like a bargain. Like if BYD were to somehow figure out a way to sell a Seagull in the United States for $21,000, I would have that over a Fiat 500e.
Yeah.
I'd have that over a lot of things. It's also like surprisingly entertaining to drive. Like the steering is nice and communicative. It's really maneuverable. Sometimes Chinese cars can like err on the side of being a little too soft for the roads, but this didn't feel that way. I was actually kind of taken aback. I had the car for about an hour and a half. So I put some kilometers on there. I really feel like I really put it through its paces there. Really, really solid vehicle.
And I mean, just for the people who don't know, like you Kevin mentioned, like at first, like I didn't know why, or I still don't know why people are so afraid of BYD, given like my experience with these cars, and like the general context is like the reason people are afraid, for the listener, is this is now the biggest EV manufacturer in the world, bigger than, they made more cars than Tesla last year. They're the biggest, obviously, in China. This is kind of like the Chinese EV equivalent of like a Toyota, right? This is like a really big automaker with a bunch of different sub-brands. Like they will sell you a car that costs $10,000, like the Seagull. They'll sell you a car that costs like $200,000 or something. These like super high end, supercars and like big like Range Rover type SUVs, and they're also expanding all over the world. Like this is not just a China company anymore. They're all over Southeast Asia. They're expanding to like Africa and Europe and Latin America. So this is they're kind of going everywhere but the United States right now.
Yeah, and I think the Seagull's question just kind of like one of the things I thought behind the wheels. I asked myself, like, could any other brand aside from BYD, match this car? And I'd call myself a small car connoisseur. I've owned way too many of these things, and I don't know if I've owned something as nice for as cheap.
Yeah.
I think about the gas-powered Chevy Spark, which back at one point in time, you could get like, a 5-speed manual base model Chevy Spark, which would be about tit for tat the same size as a Seagull, and it would not be as full featured.
That's where it's one of the areas they're really smoking us. It's like you could buy a nice car in America. You buy a luxury car, a fast car, and we're going to talk about some that we drove that were very nice and very fast in China, but like we don't make good affordable vehicles in this country or sell them to Americans anymore, like at all, and that's kind of a shame, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have Slate. We got Slate, which is very innovative and cool, but like our like, quote unquote, so-called equivalent to something like a Seagull, like the cheapest, most basic car you can buy in America, without incentives, is going to be like close to $30,000. Doesn't have power windows, doesn't have power mirrors, only has 2 seats. This shows you how kind of big the cost advantage is in China.
Yeah, this thing had heated seats.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man,
it was pretty stunning. I mean, I think when the Seagull finally does make it to Europe, and I think it is supposed to be in a few weeks here, I think a lot of the established OEMs will have a really hard time there.
Oh, that's gonna hurt.
I think this thing's gonna put up a really big fight. Some of the things I do think it needs a little bit more power and a little bit more battery, but from what I've seen, I think those are in the cards for that car for European markets.
Yeah, that's the car that like it shows up at Volkswagen's front door, and every day they go out to like take the dog out, it punches them in the mouth. Like that's what the Seagull is going to do in Europe. But they're good on the high end too. Like I really want to talk to you about the lynk&co 900, which we both drove and really liked. And that was like it was like a Volvo XC90 but better, right? Yeah, what'd you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually working on the piece about this now. I was really interested with the whole powertrain system. It's an E-Rev, which I kind of don't like E-Revs.
Extended range electric vehicles.
Well, I just have my doubts about them. And this kind of like, you know, put those to bed a little bit. I still have my doubts, but I do think like, you know, the powertrain was very smooth. It felt very electrified, which is what I liked. And yeah, like the cabin, the whole like, you know, ambiance of the vehicle, you know, of course they're giving us like, you know, top of the line models here, but it just felt very, really nice. And they actually did release pricing, at the launch that I ended up attending that week. I think the top of the line model that we drove was about 45,000 US.
Jeez, that's remarkable. So just for some backstory on this vehicle, this is a big SUV. Again, it's like Volvo XC90 sized, plug-in hybrid or E-Rev. But unlike the ones in America, it's got a little engine. It's either like a small 4-cylinder, it's like a 1.5, or you can have a 2.0 liter. So a fairly small engine and a big battery. The battery is 45 kilowatt hours or 52 kilowatt hours, which we don't make any hybrids with batteries that big here. So the end result is like you get something that drives more like an electric vehicle, and you really only feel the engine when you get on like the gas hard. Mostly it's just recharging the battery. And it was crazy nice. It was like a Range Rover-ish kind of vehicle. Like you didn't like that it got compared to that. I think it does, but I mean that as a compliment. And it felt just as nice inside for a fraction of the price.
Yeah, it was like, you know, every surface in that thing was so soft.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's like the striking thing. It was just so comfortable. The ride was just really cushy, really creamy. It's like what people think the Hyundai Palisade is. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this comes from, just like for some more background, this comes from Geely. We talked about this on last week's show, but Geely is another one of these large, you know, auto groups in China. They own lynk&co, Polestar, Volvo, Zeekr, and probably other brands that I'm not aware of. Those are the big ones.
Yep. Smart, and then Verizon, Lotus, Radar. There's like, they have too many brands. But from what the brands, there's too many brands, but the cars themselves are pretty nice. So
yeah. I think all the lynk&co and Zeekr cars would do really well in America. Shifting gears a bit, I want to talk about, you were really blown away by the NIO ET9, which is, again, the battery swapping brand NIO. This is like their flagship luxury car. It's like their 7 Series BMW or Mercedes S-Class fighter, which sounds audacious, but after being in it, it kind of convincing, right? And what did you think of that thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, it's funny because when I originally saw when the pics leaked from the MIIT, which is like, you know, one of the last homologation things for Chinese cars to go on sale, I really didn't think it looked good at all. You know, I thought it looked like a weird high riding hatchback, but in person it's really stunning. And it has a lot of trick features. I mean, of course there's battery swapping, but I mean, to me that's kind of old news. The real magic is that trick suspension it has. I don't know if you guys remember those viral videos with the Bose suspension, that Lexus LS, how it could hop over stuff. Well, they implemented that on the ET9. You know, it's gone from just being a theory to really working. And there's plenty of videos out there. Like I think there's a video going around from some of the bigger outlets where there's a violinist and the car is dancing to the violin, and that's kind of cool. But
yeah,
you really don't appreciate what that thing can do until you're really on the road here. And, you know, I put quite a bit of miles on that thing, and you know, you go over like really big heaves in the road here, and it just kind of vacuum sucks itself down to the road. It's crazy. Like you don't feel these huge imperfections on the road. It's kind of surreal. And the other surreal part is like, you know, there's a, there has streaming video like most EVs do these days, right?
In that country, yes.
Well, I mean, they have it here. They have it here too. I think maybe you look at Netflix or something on a Tesla or whatever. But the thing is, though, you could do this sort of almost 4D cinema experience with the car. They pulled over, they opened up a movie, and they had us watch this action scene, and the car could pitch and roll itself according to what was going on in the movie.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and it's just like, what? Like, what do you say to that?
Yeah.
Is it practical? Is it probably not? Is it cool?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm like, if I'm paying 6 figures for a car, that's really cool. So, is it kind of a gimmick? Probably, but I don't care. I think
gimmicks. Like, what are we doing?
Right.
What are we doing?
Right. Nothing. We're looking through bad menus on an Equinox EV, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the ET9 was very impressive.
So is like BYD is kind of like the, like BYD's been around the block for a while. Like this is like more of a Toyota type company. NIO is kind of more of NIO's a startup, right? NIO is more like their equivalent of like a Tesla, and they kind of started out, I think, with cars that resembled Teslas quite a bit. Like they were like, we're gonna basically make a new Chinese version of a Tesla. They're kind of, first of all, am I wrong about that? And second of all, are they kind of like
a little?
They're kind of like a tech leader, right? They're kind of positioning themselves as like, we're gonna like give you all this really forward thinking like technology, right?
Yeah, I think one of the NIO's like, big things that they do, not just tech. It's sort of like a lifestyle brand with them. I think I've done some writing about this before, where not only do you buy the car, you have the access to the battery swapping if you choose to take that route. But there's just a lot of other second order services that add on to the vehicles themselves. Like the NIO houses where you can go and get a cup of coffee. It's sort of like an airport lounge that they've put in big malls and other high traffic areas for NIO owners, where they have like a little space where they can sit and sip coffee or get some work done. Just stuff like that. That they think what our value adds to the car itself.
Yeah, we don't have there's hard to come up with an exact parallel to that in America. Not really.
No.
Yeah.
No. Literally, that's why I kind of compare it to airport lounges. It's almost like having an American Express lounge, but for your car.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you see some of that. Like there's the super high end brands will have like there's like a Lamborghini, club or whatever where you can go.
Right.
And maybe some of the startups are starting to do some of this sort of stuff where Rivian has spaces that are nice. It's not like a car dealership. Right. It's like a nice showroom, but nothing quite like what NIO is doing.
Right. And I think that's actually kind of like a unique part of NIO. And I think some other brands are starting to emulate it a little bit. Like I know Zeekr has a few spaces that are kind of similar, but it's definitely kind of a new thing that I think Chinese automaker brands are really trying to do here.
Well, it's probably like we said, they have 100 brands. Many of them are not that successful probably right now, but this is a market where you need to do crazy stuff. You need to do really innovative stuff to compete, right? That's
correct.
That's how you end up with cars that dance and battery swapping and all this stuff, is because there's so much competition. Everybody needs to come out with a new model or a new over-the-air feature that differentiates themselves. And this NIO houses stuff is probably a big part of that.
It is. It absolutely is.
I do want to just briefly mention the two other BYDs I got to test when we went our separate ways, and I went to Beijing for the fast charging test, which you can watch on InsideEV's YouTube channel. The Han L and Tang L, which kind of look like a Honda Accord and maybe just like a Toyota Grand Highlander or something. They're very anonymous looking, but they're low key two of the most advanced vehicles in the world right now, if not the most advanced. They're capable of the megawatt charging, so 5-minute fast charging at 1,000 kilowatts. They have 2 DC fast charging ports. That BYD God Eye autonomous driving system, that's excellent. They both did 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds, so the performance is incredible. They're kind of like, it's almost like a Buick. Like, it's a big cushy car, like we've been talking about, like really comfortable and plush, but it'll smoke like a Corvette in a straight line, like handily. So that was interesting to see. It was like the BYD Han L is the car that like the Lucid Air thinks it is. And like that's the best way I can just, it's like crazy good range and charging and speed and performance, and it feels really well put together, like, because BYD is kind of like the General Motors or Toyota of China. So interesting to see them offer that breadth of all the way down to the Seagull to the fastest charging car in the world that also does 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds. So wacky stuff.
All right, well, you want to wrap it up by, I think we should talk about kind of your guys' like big overarching thoughts coming out of China. Kevin, you for, the third time, Patrick for the first. Let's start with Kevin. Like, what is your kind of big take on the Chinese EV market after being there for the third time?
That's a good question. I think that, now we know that it's a very mature market. We know that. But I think now we're kind of moving toward this market and its big players really getting on their P's and Q's here, right? They're making sure that everything is right, not only for its own domestic consumption, but I think just making sure that they're right. So when they eventually do start exporting a little bit more than they are now, they're going to come correct. And I think that's kind of like the big feeling that I got here for the third time being in China.
Yeah, it is leveling off a bit, but it's, I don't know, for me, it's like, after seeing the 5-minute fast charging again, and knowing that like Zeekr is working on faster charging too, like there's kind of an arms race there. Like, it may be settling in, but those breakthroughs are still happening like crazy. And it's just, I feel like our companies have got to find some way to partner with these, or they're gonna get left behind. Because like even this week we saw Ford Motor is like, oh, we're kind of slowing down on our software development program. Like we're it's not advancing as fast as we thought. And then then we see the stuff out of this country. It's like I just the pace is still crazy, even if it's getting to a place where it's not breakneck all the time, right?
What do you guys think that the Western automakers need to do? What do you think the rest of the world needs to do to catch up, if that's even possible? Maybe it's, Patrick, like you said, like, and some automakers are already doing this, partnering up with Chinese companies, Chinese startups, building platforms together. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's, more government, like not abandoning the government policies we already have in place. What do you guys think needs to happen?
I'll let Kevin take it.
I don't think it's going to happen. I guess maybe that's Mr. Pessimist in me, but I think there's a huge multitude of complicated reasons that I don't think that there's one magic bullet that we can say like, oh, if they just do this one thing they can catch up. I think we're well past that now.
Yeah.
And I think from here on out it's just kind of like coping a little bit. Figuring out where they can take their wins and where they can't. But I think I'm not convinced that non-Chinese automakers have the ability to catch up to where they are now.
Yeah, it's like we may very well see a lot of these companies like Ford or General Motors become a regional maker of gas pickup trucks mainly for Americans, right?
Yep.
If these cars aren't led into the U.S., I feel like one of the big things that could help would simply be, I'm not a national security expert, not a trade expert. I don't want to see
You've lied to me all these years.
Yeah, I put that on my resume. No, like I don't want to see the American auto industry get decimated by Chinese automakers coming in as much as the next guy. I do think that maybe the one thing that could make the rest of the world catch up is letting these automakers in, letting Chinese companies into America to sell, because then you actually have that fire under your ass to, okay, like, if there's a BYD dealership and a Ford dealership on the same block, and somebody is, they see the megawatt 5-minute charging car, that's going to make these other automakers like kick shit into gear. I don't know.
And we have the EcoSport,
Yeah, exactly. And maybe, I guess I'm taking an America-centric view on this. Like, these cars are being exported to Europe, to the rest of the world. So maybe over time they will start to feel the heat from this. But it seems to me that like competition is probably the thing that might make them, innovate.
Yep, that's what I think would happen. I don't know. I think it's going to be a very interesting space to watch within the next 5 years. Not every Chinese brand is going to make it, and not every Chinese brand is going to be a winner overseas. But I do think that the more competition we have, the better. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. It's kind of anybody's game right now.
I'm just mad I can't buy a Firefly here, man. I love that thing. It was like an electric Mini Cooper, but better. I was like behind the wheel 5 minutes, and I was just driving like I stole it. It's a shame we don't have options like that over here.
All right, Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
All right, now it's time for Plus Minus, where we weigh the winners and losers in the EV world this week. Tim, who you got for me? Who's up or who's down?
Who's up is the 2025 Chevy Silverado. This truck covered nearly 540 miles in an Edmunds range test, which is just like huge. That's, to my knowledge, more than any EV has ever done in a range test in America. This thing has an EPA estimated range of 492 miles already. Really, really good. It beat it by 47 miles. And it's just really cool to see another super long range EV in America. It did better than the Lucid Air, which up until now has been the leader in range.
Did that with that big old 200 kilowatt hour Freedom battery it's got. We did this the American way, the biggest possible battery there is, Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's not exactly like we've talked about, probably too much. It's not exactly the most sophisticated approach to range that GM has right now. They just put like the biggest battery they could possibly fit in these vehicles, like the Silverado and the Hummer and the Escalade, but like it works. I think a lot of people probably want to see 500 plus miles of range in their truck, and that might get some people to buy an EV instead of not buying one. So, props to you, Silverado EV.
Yeah, and you know what's another term for energy efficiency, Tim?
No.
Communism, Tim. Godless communism. So I'm glad we're not messing around with that stuff here with the Silverado. No, mine this week is a minus. Julian on our team reported correctly also that the promising new Mercedes-Benz CLA sedan will not take 400-volt EV charging. And if you're listening to this, you're like, what the hell is 400-volt EV charging? I'm right there with you, because not most people don't think about like the voltage level of their DC public fast charger. But in this case, the problem is that I think a good amount of them in America are 400-volt, like the entire Tesla supercharger network. So basically, like in layman's terms, this EV is going to come to market and not be able to use a ton of DC public fast chargers in America, including, it seems, the Tesla network, despite having a Tesla plug from the factory. So we're kind of like, what the hell have you done, Mercedes-Benz? Yeah, I think the CLA might be optimized for Europe, I guess, because they have more advanced and more prevalent 800-volt charging there, but I don't think this is a good user experience. I think very few people are going to know or care what the voltage level of their public fast charger is. I mean, I literally do this for a living, and I barely know that and don't think about it much. But I will know that like the car won't be able to charge at a lot of public stations when it goes on sale in America. So Oh, and the best part, it's not fixable with a software update. We asked. It's a hardware problem. So until mid-cycle refresh or God knows whenever that is, this is going to be hobbling the CLA, and that's pretty disappointing. So, let's get it together, Mercedes-Benz. It's very disappointing.
Yeah, this was a weird one. This was a real head scratcher because the CLA is supposed to be Mercedes like new high-tech flagship EV that's like introducing all this awesome new technology, and being at 800 volts is a big benefit. That's kind of where EVs are going. It means that you can charge faster. Assuming you can plug into the right charger, you can charge really fast. It has other benefits too, but it's like most car companies that make their EVs 800 volt also figure out a way to allow them to plug into like regular, more prevalent 400 volt charging stations. It's really weird. I think that the customer experience thing you mentioned is true, which is that you're going to have a lot of people who buy this car and show up to a charger, and plug in, and it just doesn't work because they don't know. And that's I think that's a big miss on Mercedes' part.
I'm looking this up now because I just thought of this. I do believe these cars will work with the Mercedes-Benz high power charging network because those are 800 volt. It would have been utterly hysterical if they somehow didn't work with that, And if you were our good friend Andrew Cornelia, I think you would have been very upset about that, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So I hope Mercedes figures this out,
Yeah,
not good.
For their part, they did say we asked spokesperson about it, and they were like, look, the car will route you to the right charging stations. Like if you look up charging stations in the car, it'll route you to the ones that it can work with. But for a lot of people, if you're going to go use Google Maps or something or PlugShare, and you're just looking for charging stations, you might end up having a really bad time.
I just think about I try to frame this stuff so that anybody can understand it. So my parents in their 70s, are only podcast listeners. I'm kidding. There's a few others. Will understand this stuff. And if you say to any reasonable person, oh, it works with some chargers but not others because of voltage differences, they will go back to the dealer and buy a gas car, and I don't blame them. And it's let's all try and do better here, okay?
No, as far as I know, I don't even think you can. There's not a good way of looking that up. You can't just Google for 800 volt chargers. It's a crazy decision to me.
I'm just going to call Tom Malogny on his cell phone every time I have to go charge now, and just no matter day or night, just bother him. And that's kind of my plan. All right. Well, thanks for listening to the Plugged In podcast from InsideEVs. Tim will be back next Friday. I'm on vacation. So, if you need something from me, don't bother me. It's gonna be great. Today's show is produced by Michael Perkins and is brought to you by the Motorsport Network.
Make sure to hit the follow button wherever you get your podcasts and send us your questions about the EV world to podcast@InsideEVs.com. See you next time.